we definitely have a sense that the ability to go digital, as was mentioned by previous speakers, has been very important to maintain the economy running, but will also be important to kickstart economies back out of COVID-19. And how this happens will also determine how inclusive that kickstart is going to be. So I will try to explain what happens at the multilateral level, so far away from the business work that we have just been hearing about, but what is happening at the multilateral level, for instance, in Geneva at the WTO, how that affects the stories that we have just been listening about. Now, during COVID-19, a lot of what we have previously been doing physically has moved digitally. We have started to shop from home. We have started to work from home. We have seen in our work at the OECD that the work mobility, so moving between your home and your work, has been reduced by 50% in many places. The use of bandwidth has increased by 25% during the lockdown, in some countries like Canada and Chile by 50%. So that shows to which extent being able to use digital was important during COVID-19. Now, but not everybody had the ability to go digital. It's very important in order to work digitally that you have access to a digital infrastructure that was already raised by Isabel at that point, and that you also have access to the devices you need to go digital. Now, as you already mentioned, I only recently moved to Paris. Well, unfortunately, in my new Paris home, I've been without internet access for a number of weeks. So I could not work from home. And there are many places in the world where internet access is an issue. Either it doesn't exist, it is of bad quality, or it is too expensive. This is the first thing policymakers need to address in order for digitalization to be inclusive. Access to the internet will imply investments in infrastructure. That's most of the time a national agenda, but it also implies access to the material you need to build internet access. I'm thinking of cables. I'm thinking to the entire machinery you need in order to make the internet function. Many of these things are imported. And how easy it is to import, how expensive it is, this is the kind of things that are decided through the multilateral trading systems, where, for instance, tariffs are set for the cables that are being sent from one country to the other. We heard access to devices. Isabel also made reference to this. Access to computers, access to phones. These products are typically not produced in your home country. Wherever you are, the majority of the content of those devices will come somewhere from abroad. We have calculated this at the OECD. So how expensive those devices are will again depend on how easy it is to trade across borders and how expensive it is. Now, and in the multilateral trading systems, for instance, through agreements like the WTO Information Technology Agreement, we ensure that it is cheap or to trade and that no tariffs are set on these kind of goods when they are traded. Participation in these kind of agreements will therefore determine how easy it is to access these kind of devices and how cheap, accessible these devices will be for people and individuals across the globe. I've been speaking so far about how the multilateral trading system can reduce the costs of trade and therefore reduce the cost of access to the internet and access to devices we need to use the internet. Digitalization itself can also make trading easier. That's something we have seen in the discussions around trade facilitation. We know that when you can do your trade, fill in your forms, deal with different kind of authorities digitally, that this reduces the costs of doing business, but also can make trade more inclusive. Isabel used the term, you don't know on the internet, errors too. It's not always easy to see whom you are dealing with. This can be an advantage. This can be an equalizer. We have, for instance, seen in my previous job at the ITC that digitally being able to bring things through the border makes it easier for women to trade. Digitalization can be an equalizer for women. Now, so far I've often still been speaking about getting physical things across the border. But a lot of digitalization also implies fully digital trade, where something digital crosses the border. For instance, I could read a book digitally, a book that is written in another country. Now, that is a concept of trade that has very much changed our way in the multilateral trading system to look at trade and to assess how trade takes place and how trade is priced. The fact that digital trade exists, again, is in my view as a big potential to be an equalizer, to lead to inclusiveness. By making books digitally accessible, information can more easily flow across borders. I remember still that over 30 years ago, I had to take a train from Germany to Switzerland, 3 hours, to get access to a book that was accessible in the Swiss library and not in the German library in the city where I was traveling. I could read that book because I was only 3 hours away from that library. If I had lived in New Zealand or in Canada, I would not have gone to that library. Digital trade, digitalization can very much facilitate the flow of information and contribute to more inclusiveness. At the OECD, we do not negotiate trade agreements. The agreements I refer to, they are negotiated at the WTO, but we very much contribute to a better understanding of these issues and therefore hopefully contribute to making it easy to come up with inclusive trade policies in the digital space. We contributed, for instance, to the handbook on measuring digital trade, which makes it easier for policymakers to understand what digital trade is and how the policies, inclusive policies, can be set. We are also working on a better understanding on how data flow in the context of digital trade and what policies governments are using in order to ensure their populations that trade is not also only inclusive, but also protects their privacy and is secure. But the OECD, and definitely in the Trade and Agricultural Directorate, where we want to make trade work for all, we continue to stand ready to help the speakers in this panel, the audience, and everybody to make digital trade work for all, also as part of the kickstart, hopefully out of this COVID-19 crisis. Thank you.